double check with folks about whether there were any edits or additions to the minutes.
Nothing for me.
I'm going to say hearing none, I'm going to keep on trucking. Mary, do we know for Mr. Murphy and Murner if their absence was planned for tonight, or we don't know? So they
Did not hear from them.
All right, we'll catch them up if they show up.
School's out for summer.
For some of us. Okay, so in the adjustments to the agenda, there is a cost per enrollment, and I think I maybe didn't communicate as clearly as I wanted to with Chris. So I'm actually going to propose that we skip over this. What I was hoping to see in the table that's included there of taxes per enrollment is different than what's here. This is really the same information we've looked at before, which is the total taxes paid by a town divided by the number of students originating in that town. And what I asked Chris I've clarified with her today, what I'd like to see and what I've asked her to have for our next meeting is the total taxes paid per town divided by the number of students in the district. Because one of the things that we seem to continue to circle around, and here's my rationale for asking for it, is focusing on the number of students each town sends and how much those towns are paying for those students. But the reality is the taxes paid by each town are sent forward to operate the district as a whole because we're in a cooperative model. And so the tax dollars from Lancaster are not then segregated out to only support students from Lancaster. They're there to help support all of the students from Sparta. So I've asked Chris to kind of help us see that picture, because for sure we want that to be closer to an equitable amount in terms of the town's contributions to help run their schools, because it's all pay so all can learn. So it is in the agenda for tonight, but I'd like to propose that we skip over that because it's not quite what I was hoping to look at. And I prefer to have a conversation that's on that newer data set. I'm a little challenged unless you have background information. Marion, sorry, my apologies. I promise, that's not a sign that my phone is mad at us. The data from Jim Murphy, I know we referenced this. This was referenced in our last meeting, and Jim had specifically asked if Chris could resurface it for us. And I don't really have
Any more to
a
add?
backstory to add to this information.
This was done
beyond
during
what's-
withdrawal. This
During
table,
withdrawal,
yeah,
okay.
that's where it came from.
All right. So beyond what I can see just by looking at the tables here, which appears to be for a home of a given assessed value, what was the total tax assessed on that home? And of that total tax, what portion was school tax? And so we could just read the table as it is. If we look there, we're not looking at it in a graphical representation so much as a table, but we can see that the numbers of tax paid for school tax based on the value of the property is closer. There's less disparity from one town to the next.
They are 2020 numbers.
Correct, yeah. But without Jim or Chris here, I kind of don't feel like I can speak much more to that than what it is. So the remainder of the agenda really was shaped by the two questions we asked Chris to take back to the DRA following our last meeting. The first was this question: if we wanted all 5 towns to be on the same reval cycle, what would we need to do? And if you'll recall, we were somewhat careful about how Chris shaped that question, because we wanted to have as much information as we could possibly get about what our options were if this group decides to recommend moving our 5 towns within the cooperative school district to the same reval cycle. And I think it's most clearly laid out on page 2 of that response.
Right.
And so in essence, what they say is we cannot let a town go beyond that 5 years. I was afraid that would be the answer, but there it is. So the only real option is for some to perform a reval early. And they've kind of laid out a cadence by which we could achieve that. That would end up with one town doing a reval back to back and the other towns phasing in with those reval periods being less than 5 years. So
it identifies Whitefield, Jefferson, and Carroll, but what about the other two towns? Are they gonna be at that 5-year mark on 2023?
That's what I'm assuming.
that's what it sounds like, Norm. Now, in our last meeting, we did have the years as Chris was able to collect it from the towns. This wasn't information from DRA, but just in her calling around to the towns and identified that Carroll had been done in 17, which would make sense then that they're now on that
They're doing it
reval.
now, right?
Dalton was in 18, so due in 23. Jefferson was just done in 21. Lancaster was 2018.
So that's why you're both
Yeah.
2023,
And
Dalton and Lancaster.
Whitefield did an update in 19, but the last full revaluation was in 14. So if Carroll's
I certainly
happening
would
right now,
offer that to get everybody on the same page, Jefferson would not have an issue with doing that reval 2 years early. We would be apparently the one most impacted because we'd be 2 years early, whereas other towns would be 1 year early and Carroll would be back to back. So again, I don't think Jefferson would have an issue with that at all.
Do you be willing to do one next year?
Absolutely.
okay.
My guess is that Whitefield would not.
Another question is, would the town have to vote on it, for it or against it, a deliberative session? Because it is a budgetary matter, it would require money.
We can ask that question.
So to
I
do it,
think it probably would have to be a budget item at the town
yeah, so
meeting.
to redo it for 23 is possible. It won't be voting till March of 23. It's a
We would
tough,
just put the funds in our 23 budget. We do our budget
Do you
meeting.
want that question to go out?
I think it makes sense to first to query the towns, the other towns. We have Norm here, who is a selectman from Jefferson saying yes. We've got John, who's a selectman from Whitefield, saying probably not. But we don't have Lancaster here tonight, so.
Well, the question I'm talking about is so the towns have to put that on a.
No, well,
A warrant article or just put it in the budget.
Yeah, well, yeah, so
Dalton-
different question at the state level is, does it have to be a warrant article or mentioned at the deliberative session? And then Dalton. is
Dalton and
due next year
Lancaster were
anyway.
both doing it next year anyways.
Well, in the
Carroll-
deliberative session, you mean the deliberative session for the school district?
No, for the town
For
budget.
the towns, this is a town budget
The,
issue.
the,
The
the
reval.
district can't ask for a
That's what I'm saying. I
Yeah.
didn't think it could.
No, we can't.
reevaluation.
No.
We can only ask the towns if they would do it. But it would mean that Carroll is doing it now and would have to do it again next year.
maybe simple, it may not be a lot of money, they have all the numbers.
Right,
Right.
Apply an algorithm of the
right.
1 year.
economic crash we're waiting for.
I mean, we would just do it. We would put it in our budget, mention it at our public hearing and have it at our town meeting.
Mhm. Public hearing, that's what I mean. Yeah. So if we looked at that timeline, assuming that the answer comes back yes, that this would have to go before the voters in each town, the question of reval going before the voters in each town. And potentially be a warrant article.
What I would do though, just with some anticipation, is check with our auditors and see what that number would be.
We're not at budgeting season yet,
Very soon.
so, but it will start soon.
It'll be on us before we know it.
To be honest, before we know it. You're absolutely right.
I know every year they factor in building permits, whether they're remodeling or whole new homes, and add that to the valuation.
Mhm.
Changes, not just every 5
All
years.
the pickup orders, yeah.
Pickup orders, yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of building permits out right now.
What do you think about Dalton, Tim? Do you think that's a thing that
If it costs money, they'll vote it down.
That goes- Well, you're doing 23,
doing
right?
it
So it doesn't really,
anyways.
right, so Dalton would
Wouldn't
do it
impact-
23 anyway.
Or Lancaster.
Or Lancaster,
Or Lancaster.
they're also doing it 23.
Only three other towns that would be impacted. Jefferson the most, Whitefield next, and then Dalton, and then, Carroll.
Well, we don't know, for Carroll,
So,
it might be whatever they pay in this year, then the assessor might say that's what you're gonna pay again if we do it again next year.
Right, but I mean, I'm saying the most cost would be to the town of Jefferson because of the length of time since the last
Right.
full reval. It would cost Carroll less money. It would cost,
Why would it be less money?
because they just did it. It could
Yeah, but
be a
doesn't-
back to back.
But the assessor may say it's gonna cost you the same, whatever you're paying
That's
this
right.
year,
And it may. It
so
may.
it wouldn't be
It
less
may
money.
not. Less money than a 5-year eval.
Especially if,
You would think it would be.
Yeah.
yeah, you'd think so, but especially if multiple towns have the same assessor. That can
That's the other variable.
That
is
can
that-
throw a rock into
Well,
it
guess
real
what, we don't.
quick.
They could say, I can't get to it.
Yeah,
You're not on that schedule.
Guys is
And we'll worry about it when
Jason
we get the other answer.
Call, what's his last name?
Jason Call.
Jason Call.
Jason Call.
He's across from our town office.
He does Whitefield, I think he does one other town.
Does Jackson.
No, I mean, in our district,
Oh,
not sure though.
so if we're just thinking in terms of timeline, even if towns proactively anticipated that expense for 2023, it would still have to be approved by the voters in the March meeting.
Right.
Then the reval has to happen.
Right.
And that data on what those equalized valuations would look like to help inform a calculation of apportionment would not be available until, if everybody did their assessments in 23.
if everybody got on the same page, if you will, in 23, then it wouldn't matter when we use that data from that point forward, because everybody would be on the same sheet of music, if you will.
Wouldn't use the DAR's a formula at all. They're, what do they call it?
It's an equalized valuation.
Equalized valuation.
And I think that's part of the piece, is that trying to get as many variables out of the way as you can to make it, I guess, more fair.
So that brings us to the middle of the response from the DRA. The second question that Chris asked was whether adequacy aid could be pooled and distributed district-wide prior to going to the towns. And the DRA's response was essentially to give us the statute on certification of district taxes. And the statute specifically says the department shall deduct each pre-existing school district's adequate education grant. And move from there. At which point the selectmen of each town shall assess taxes as provided by the law. So it wasn't as clear-cut an answer as we'd hoped for.
it's coming from the government.
And their,
And that's where I go back to Chris's question, why don't we trust the DRA? That's fine.
their primary answer was, other than pointing to these two statutory sections, their suggestion is we speak to our attorney. Yeah. But all cooperative apportionments have adequacy aid applied after the apportionment has been determined. And that's the default method that's set forth in that statute.
That's what really messes up the logic of the formula.
Correct.
It's just, it boggles me, because when you look at the worst case in here, who pays is Carroll and the best is Lancaster, and I mean, I'm not trying to pick on a town, I still shop there. They have the boatload of the students compared to Carroll, they have 7 times as many. The valuation is 77% of Carroll's, but yet they pay such a small amount, and that's because of the aid of, one year was $4 million, I think this year was $3,700,000. That really changes it.
It does.
It's too bad it all couldn't be pulled as one, we're saying we're a cooperative education, but we're not cooperating with
Right.
aid.
And that's where it throws a snafu into the formula in the piece that Chris is asking for with regards to what's the cost per student in the district. Is because if you do that for that piece, what you've not factored in is that aid piece. That's part of the issue. So,
That's why we were after
It's
less
tough.
emphasis on valuation, because that throws it off so much. 50,000 compared to 7,500 is a big number.
There's a piece of that continues to leave me very concerned that we're doing a lot of good, hard work locally in our district, but are kind of hamstrung by the state formula.
correct.
Right now in the Conval situation, there was a presentation today about that at the conference I was at. They're not talking about taxes, they're not talking about equalized valuation. Their main point in this whole lawsuit is the adequacy of education, adequacy aid, and the base from the 3,700, it should be 9,900, and then from there, how everything would sugar out. So they're not focusing on cost per pupil, taxes, or anything, it's just that adequacy aid.
Right.
At some point, there was a decision, like an interim opinion passed down in this particular case that the state offered that the problem wasn't with the formula, it was that in truth, the districts took issue with the calculation, the definition of the cost of an adequate education, and therefore the whole suit should be tossed. And if it was brought back, it should be brought back on the grounds that the statutory definition was.
And that's what this one is based on.
So they are moving in that direction.
Well, the thing though is, even if they increase the cost, the cost of an adequate education, if the state says, okay, or the court says, the cost of an adequate education is now $12,000, the state has to come up with $12,000. How are they gonna get $12,000? They're gonna increase the SWEP tax. It's not gonna change what anybody's paying.
Until I fix it.
It's just instead of coming directly from the
Move it
local,
around.
instead of coming directly from local, it's gonna come from local, go to the state, and the state's gonna send it back to the districts.
I think the hope in the lawsuit is that not happen. What they do is they change that base price, if you will, for an adequate education, and they take it from that pool of adequacy aid to fund that, and then whatever is left is what gets redistributed. That's their goal, I think, from what I've read.
But either way, the money comes from the
Well,
taxpayer.
at its core, it's gonna come from property owners.
Property
Let's be
owners,
super
exactly.
clear.
Yeah, it's true.
Taxpayers in New Hampshire are
Yeah.
property
Right,
owners,
property owners.
Right. which
Yeah.
disproportionately impacts counties like ours, where the average age of a property owner is rising.
Yeah.
And pushing those property owners into space where they are living on fixed incomes, and no matter how much they support the schools and how much they understand the need for expanded budgets,
So we can't afford it.
they can't afford it.
Yeah.
They simply can't afford it. So we'll continue to follow.
Talking about a sales tax or an income tax?
Well,
They go
Or
to
business
court
contribution?
April 23rd. Judge Wolf.
I mean, the sad part about it is you see people who are 3 years behind on their property tax because they're elderly, and the towns are trying to work with them to let them make payments so they can keep their houses, and they're going deeper and
Yeah,
deeper and
there's no
deeper
way
and
you,
deeper.
once you
Snowballs,
get
yeah.
under, you can't get yourself out.
You can't dig yourself out. It's very seldom do you see somebody that is able to get themselves out. Sometimes it happens because they got behind and
Or they hit the lottery.
because of, loss of a job or something, but I mean, most of the people that are on social security, whatever, they're just digging the hole deeper and deeper. And I tell you, the worst thing I have to do, one of the worst parts of being a selectman is to decide whether or not the town's gonna take somebody's property because they haven't been paying their taxes. Fortunately, some of the places are in such bad shape, we don't want them anyway.
Sure. You don't want to get a Superfund site.
So there we rest then on the question of reval. It sounds like in terms of action items that we would need to follow up on. The first is a question to each of the towns that would be impacted. So not Lancaster, not Dalton. Some clarity from the select board about whether they'd be open to contemplating a change in their reval date to bring us all to the same place.
And they still don't make the ultimate decision. It's
Well, and
the
so
voters.
the second part
voters-
of that, the second action item is clarity from the state about whether that move needs to be a warrant article or if it can simply be added into the operating budget as Norma suggested.
Either way, the voters still have a vote.
They have a
Yeah.
vote on the budget.
And again, I'm guessing that we would want it to be in a warrant article.
It feels transparent and honest to the
Yeah.
voters to just.
I mean, it would be in the budget, but it would also, here again, be a warrant article.
Did we ever determine what a typical revaluation does cost? Any idea?
Sometimes,
Well, ours last year was 63.
something was sticking in my mind that ours was between 68 and 69 the last time we did it, the full one.
We're in the 60s. Can't pin it to it. I thought 63 or 64.
But it's hard to,
But I mean, money's set aside to.
Yeah,
start
we
getting
were
it.
5 years,
Little bit every-
12,000 a year.
we put some
Just
aside
to do the
every year.
pickups plus.
But,
And, the question for the voters is a twofold question. The first is the actual line item for the cost of the assessment. And the second is, what does that do to my tax bill if the reval comes early, especially on top of a real estate boom like we've seen?
The other big question, though, is we don't know. I know Norm doesn't trust the state, but we don't know that the state is not doing the proper job of doing the figures, knowing that all 5 towns are on different schedules and different years.
Well, here again, who checks their figures? Does anybody? Or do we just take it from them and say, good
Well,
enough?
that's all I'm saying.
That's what
So
I'm
we
saying.
could, what I'm saying is we could do this and get all 5 towns on the same schedule
Right.
and not see any change
But
for
but
the-
here-
Because
for
they're
that
still
money
using
that
the
we
state
spent.
formula. Yeah.
that's a variable that you're taking out of the formula. Right now, we're just accepting what they give us. And I can tell you right now, I find it hard to believe that a community where they screw the formula up and they're paying less than they should is not going to speak up. There you go. That's the issue. There's
Well, I don't
no
think
checking.
anybody ever thinks they're paying less taxes than they're supposed to.
Once you get past the formula, there's no check and balance. That's my issue too, is there's no check and
Well,
balance.
if you wanted to take the deep dive and figure it out, what their formula is and how it works and
Well,
get
should
the
that,
real numbers and-
should
I
that,
think
mean,
it's less what the
I'm
formula
sure
is
it's-
and what I'm hearing from Norm is who's holding the state accountable for applying it properly and not making math errors.
and then again, double checking whether or not it was applied accurately. Does the district do that at all? Or they just take it and that's gospel? That's the part of the whole thing.
Mhm.
Is we're just accepting that it's okay.
But then
Again.
it should affect each town the same because they're applying the same formula to all 5 towns.
Well,
We like
the
to
file
think
we
they
get
are, but
from the
nobody
DRA
knows.
has it for all the
Nobody
towns.
checks it.
So,
I'm sure there's checks and balances at the DRA. I don't think one person does it and hands on.
That would be a no.
You don't think, you don't think they?
No.
Nobody
They
goes
do
to
it?
check
No.
that.
When they assign someone to do that, they figure they're doing a good job, that's it. There's no check and balance. They're taking the numbers from your assessor and calling it good enough. And then they're trying to apply a formula, which isn't perfect even according to the Department of Ed. and hope for the best. And when they send it to you, because no district ever complains about it, it's good enough.
Well, because the district's gonna get the same amount of money no matter which formula they use.
Well, they
When it comes-
may.
When it comes to
but
the
a town
end,
may
it's just
pay
where
more-
it comes from, right?
But
No,
a
I
town may
understand
pay
that.
more than they should.
Right, no, I
That's
understand that.
where I think we have a responsibility to some degree to make sure that the numbers are accurate.
Now you've raised the question in my head anyway of what is the checks and balances on those figures as they come out. I mean, I know the spreadsheet comes out with all towns. So it's a single file that goes to everybody with everybody's numbers on it. But
Valuation is a strange bird because you can have a house within the same town and one part of it worth, say, 100,000. If it goes to a different part of the town, amongst houses that are more valuable, it's worth more. Or the same house from Jefferson and Dalton may not be worth the same. Built the same guy, same square footage, same year built. It's all.
That's the system for all the taxes for everybody,
I know,
but
the assessors
municipal
have to-
taxes and state taxes and federal, whatever. So it's, I mean, we're not gonna fix that problem anyway.
It's just like looking at what when they do the, do the reval, what the value of the house is, and then you get a bank to come in and look at it, and the bank number's totally different.
Yeah, I got an email from Zillow today, it said my house is now at 230. I'd take half of that.
And if you took the different assessors from the district and took them to a piece of property within the district, you're gonna get a different number from each one. That's the way it is.
You get an appraiser for a bank loan and he's
That's
looks
the
at
other
comp
variable.
sales.
And
One year
sometimes,
we did that, they said there were no comps within 5 miles of your house because nothing sold.
Yeah.
That was like 2008 or
Yeah.
9 when everything
Yeah.
went flat.
and sometimes the comps they look at aren't even,
Comps.
yeah, they do. I mean, you've got a 3-bedroom house and with a garage and everything else, and they're using a 2-bedroom, 1-bath house as a comp.
And there are so many variables, that's what makes this difficult to do.
Well, it does. So I think in terms of the work that we can do here, we have to be a little bit realistic as a committee about which pieces we can control and which we can't. And which rabbit holes we jump down because those are variables that might anger us, but they're not really gonna change the end outcome. So in terms of using our energies wisely, I think it's pretty clear, a small committee from northern New Hampshire is not going to change the entire assessment practices across the entire state for all assessors.
Right.
We're not going to change the reval process as it's conducted across even all our 5 towns. We may, and I think it's reasonable to ask the question, we may be able to get people onto the same cycle so that it evens out some of the ebb and flow that happens with real estate booms and busts.
Be
And
honest.
we're obviously not going to change the state's formula because we've been working on that for.
Well, I think that we need to look into the new legislation that is coming around. There's quite a few bills that are coming up around cooperative school districts and apportionment formulas. And it's right around the corner. So I think that we should at least look into those to see what they are going to be looking into, because that may or may not help us in this situation. I'll be happy to find those.
Yeah, is there a place maybe through the DOE or through the School Board Association or someone who has like a succinct
Oh, yeah.
list of the legislation that's coming and
I think the School Boards Association tracks that.
Yeah, and the
I think so,
New
too.
Hampshire SAA does as well.
Mhm.
But these are new ones that are coming up. They're just bubbling right now.
might also be
There's
helpful.
also ones to abolish all school districts,
Yeah, they don't have,
cooperative
they don't
districts.
have they don't even have their drafts of anything done yet. They
Right.
can't even start until September.
Right.
You
But
would
if
think they
that
would have
works,
put that in the
then
original
Yeah.
legislation, that if you wanted to form a district, you would have all the members on the same year. They could have done it,
Way back in the old
1963.
days. Yeah, they
But-
could have gotten on the same reason.
Coulda, shoulda, woulda.
Was there even adequacy aid back in 1963?
That's probably why it wasn't written in.
Probably not. No.
So John, if those There are bills currently written that are moving, but you
That's
said
correct.
something about
You-
information being available in September. Could you
Yeah,
clarify that?
what happens is, in September, any new representatives can file legislation. Anybody who's incumbent now can already have done that. But any new representative will file what they call an LSR, which is a legislative request.
But that would be after November then.
And they'll file them, and then incumbents who, they can file them again in January. So you can get bills spread out over the hard time. And the problem comes is when you can get a list of what the LSRs. The problem comes is you read the title and it doesn't necessarily relate to what's in the bill.
Maybe a new bridge on Route 91.
I mean, you never know what's going to happen, and they just keep cranking them out, and and unfortunately, the way things are set up, every bill goes for a hearing, so. And you have to be careful what happens to a bill, because I've seen bills go in one way and come out with
New face.
totally different direction.
Like the budget?
Well,
So-
that is that way all the time. The budget's never been the same as it goes in. There's always somebody who gets in there and puts their little pet thing in there, and
So it would be helpful if, for our next meeting, you could get us just kind of a summary, I think, of current legislation that's currently moving through the process, acknowledging that we may see a new flush of stuff come out in September. And I wonder if there's a way to get that,
I'll get that.
with the schedule that's attached, like if it's what committees it's passing through, or has been, what's coming in terms of action on that bill, if it's got hearings upcoming, or if it's passed in one chamber and is now moving to the
I
other.
mean, you can do it by individual bill easy
Yeah.
enough.
Yeah.
But
That's what I'm thinking, is if we had a line listing of the currently
Once we get the
active
number of
legislation.
once you get the bill number, you can look the bill
can look
number
up
up, and
each
it'll
one.
tell you what committee it's going to, if it's been assigned yet, because sometimes it doesn't. Like the bills will not be assigned until after the November election, because they don't know who's going to be speaker.
Mhm.
They don't know who's going to be leadership. They don't know who's going to be in charge. So the committee chairs could change. Usually the first of the year is before you start getting anything kind of solidified. Usually you meet for the first time in early December. And then you meet for the first session in January, and by that time, there are committee chairs and vice chairs, and everybody's been anointed.
Assigned. Mhm. I think that could be a helpful thing to have some oversight for, just because if there's likely to pass into law legislation already in the pipeline that changes what we're trying to do here, I just want to be efficient in our efforts.
Yep.
and
I was
be
thinking the
thoughtful
same
about
thing.
Are there any Department of Ed rules on the horizon that would affect what we're doing or what we want to do?
Not that I can think of. All the ed rules, as far as education, are all changing, 306s. But I don't know.
Do we have a sense of enrollment numbers for next year, Mary? I know
They're still hovering at 1,000.
they're still around.
Yep. Some are coming, some are leaving.
Did we see a super big return or dip in return from the pandemic, or did we really have some?
We had like about
Sustained loss.
34 students that went out to homeschool during the pandemic that came back. So it was like 30-ish. So,
But not a significant longstanding disruption to learning. No. As I asked because it's a different question that I received this week from a community member, and I felt like our enrollment we've seen a steady decline in enrollment over the last 50 years, really. It's not a slope that's been accelerated recently. And it correlates with the decline in our population base, so.
And we don't have any of our students going to Hartwood,
Yeah.
Going where?
to Hartwood, the new charter school
Trying to
that's
look
in,
up If
Jefferson.
there's anything I can find on.
966 LSIs listed.
You know, they've got another public hearing on that request, the 14th of July.
Okay, so those were the last items that we had in the agenda to look at today. We do have a space for public input. Welcome. Would you like to contribute anything this evening?
Just identify myself. I'm Emery Slaughter from the town of Carroll. I just came to listen and learn.
Okay, terrific. Well, thank you. Welcome. We have to set a date for the next meeting and then look at agenda items. For sure, in terms of agenda items, I want to bring back that cost per enrollment with the new numbers I've asked Chris to add in there. And then whatever we can learn from the towns about resetting the reval cycle. And whatever we learn from the state about what that process would have to look like in terms of any mandates that have to be met for warrant articles and the like. Any other agenda items that anyone would like to have there?
You know, you started to look into like school districts, if you will, like the Gorham School District. And how did that all work out? Are we still looking into that? Their apportionment formula, if you will. And did we apply that to any of our numbers to see what they look like?
It is a question that was hanging out here on the agenda for Gorham and Shelburne, what the district does for capital expenses, bonds, reserves, how are they accounted for in the budget? And I did not see that response
I
back
didn't
yet,
either.
so I think Chris is still waiting to hear from them.
They were 95.5.
A 95 eval?
No, 5% on valuation and 95 per pupil.
Okay.
You know, sometimes that works different in towns that have a similar
I guess I'm
amount
just curious,
of student
you know, is there a
population.
way for us to plug our data into that formula to see what it looks like?
Yes,
If not
and so in the agenda from our last meeting, there are links that Chris created to some of those pictures. I think what she did was map out the 95.5 tax rate.
I guess I didn't see.
So there was a migration there, Norman. It was, instead of taking the migration to the 80/20, it went to 95.5.
Yeah,
I think they did a bunch of different ones.
It's
it's there.
third one there.
Chris did.
This one. This is 95.5.
There it is.
And so,
The back side shows the graph.
We also looked at 50/50.
and 80/20, yeah.
And then,
Now, the 95.5 does bring, over time, by the time the migration is done, it does bring it to we see a divergence happening that's still leaves, I think it's Dalton hanging out there with some of the largest increases.
Dalton loses no matter which way.
But
Other than the current.
some calculations bring us closer to an equitable rate per mil.
Right.
I think if we're gonna have a conversation with that includes a consideration of legislation that's currently in the pipeline,
Mhm.
it would be super helpful for Mr. Murner to be present for that, and I don't, so I'm a little bit hesitant about setting a next date without his input.
Want me to call him and ask him about July 13th? That's 2 weeks, a Wednesday. Give me some dates and we can, I can call him. I think he's in Florida.
Wrong time of year.
No,
So I'll ask him July
if
13th.
he's in Florida, he's probably going on a cruise.
No, I mean, this is helpful if we're gonna do these types of calculations, if you will, but I think what's also helpful when we do this is there's a way to superimpose where we're at now. So you can actually just look at that and say, okay, this is what the new piece does, this is where we're at. You know,
I think it's out, it's
It's there,
Well,
it's just a
it's the
separate piece
first-
of paper.
it's the first-
that's what I'm saying.
You could actually print it on an overlay and just lay it right
Yeah.
over top of it.
Correct.
it's usually 50/50.
Okay. Again, it's good to look at different formulas and so forth, but it's also nice if you're gonna interject a different formula to show where we are now,
Well,
without it being
you
a
know,
separate
Chris,
piece of paper.
someone mentioned that at our last meeting, and Chris did point out that where we are now is that first data point of 60/40.
I understand the number, but I'm seeing if you're gonna do a chart, can we see it on the chart as well? Compare with, because all we're seeing when we see that is the new formula, or a proposed formula, if you will.
Well, no, it's a migration. So the first year is 60/40, and then we're moving it up by percentages as we go.
Okay.
Um,
That's a different ballgame. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that if we can do this chart to show these numbers, can't we just do the same chart and show where we are now on the same piece of paper?
It wouldn't be a chart, it wouldn't be
It just-
Oh, why
over 5
couldn't it?
years.
Why couldn't you? If you're saying that,
Where we are now is where we are now.
I understand, but you can't look at this and tell me where we are now. That's what I'm
Yes, I
saying.
can. It's the first data point. And that data point would stay the same over
60/40
each year.
here.
It would stay
Okay.
60/40 for every year.
It is-
So
it
they'd
is
just be
there,
flat
so-
lines.
There would just be a flat line.
Because it assumes that chart assumes that it's the valuation and enrollment doesn't change year on year. It's
Because
just
we
if we
can't
took today's
Predict
number,
what it's gonna
because
be.
we don't have those variables.
Okay, all right.
But what we don't have are the different formulas laid on top of each other.
Right.
So we have a chart that takes us to 50/50 over 5 years. We have a chart that takes us to 95/5 over 5 years. And so those superimposed on top of each other could be
It'd be spaghetti.
a thing to look at. Well, I think you might be surprised. That
Paint
data
stores have a lot of colors.
representation might bring some things into sharp focus, actually.
It's,
Just have to make the text a bit wider.
So we're still looking
Okay.
for next week.
I know I can do the 13th.
Can everybody do the 13th, and I'll call Troy, and if he can't,
As far as I know, I don't have any Wednesdays that are bad.
You sure? Trial starts the 14th. You're not gonna get tagged for something?
Not that I know. Who knows? You never know. Let's put it this way. They won't find out till the 14th. It actually starts the 18th.
Okay. Well, my subpoena's to the 14th.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, I don't have anything as far as I know right now.
and then otherwise I'll send out a doodle poll or something.
Thank you, Marion. I appreciate that.
is the debt issue on the, putting in, what's the word, adequacy aid, taking it off the top and then reformulating, is that off the table? The state says no.
Well,
They
the
actually
state,
threw it back in our face.
they threw it back in our face and said, ask council.
At least they didn't say send it back to committee.
Here's that. So
Can we look at the numbers by doing that? You know,
just
with
to
the
do the
adequate.
mathematical exercise, to ask the question.
Well, yeah, in
Yeah,
21, there was a total of 7,504,000. You take that off the total budget and then apply your formula.
Just to see what it looks like.
They screw a lot, it's got to screw Dalton because they get screwed everywhere we go.
That's true.
It's been,
Well, then,
been that way
it
ever
takes it
since I've been
to the,
around.
I mean, what you don't have is, if we take a $150,000 house and just, how much are they paying in taxes if that house is in each town?
So
Well, and that's the data that Jim, that
I
is in
think
that
that's
item
what Jim
there.
was asking for.
I think he did it for
for-
175 and
75,
200 and-
200, yeah,
There's $150,000 house in Jefferson. I'm here to guess that that's already been bought for $300,000.
Well,
Yeah.
then pick a 200,000, whatever the number, but it's,
The evaluation this year, that, there's no more $200,000 homes.
You're right.
Why is that one so high?
because you have the least valuation of,
You have the least
Total
number of
property.
students, or no, not least
no,
number of students,
but they have the least number of
Property value.
property values.
Yeah.
Are the lowest out of, so you have
So they pay
less,
the most?
You have to,
Yes,
you have to pay
yes.
more per mill in order to pay your
Yes,
share.
it
Yes.
balances out, the mill rates go up and down with valuation.
Yeah, right.
Just
It's a
usually it'll cost you a couple $100 no matter what.
I just know that I pay $4,000 a year whether I want to or not.
well, how else can pay your salary?
What salary?
Last time I checked, us public servants.
Those big
were
bucks
down
as a
big
selectman.
salaries.
Yeah, if you figure it out per hour,
Yeah. And mileage.
yeah.
I can appreciate that. Our stipends on the school board almost pay my tax bill every year. So there's that.
Mhm.
Christmas shopping,
No
about
tax
what it
bill.
is.
I can tell you what my salary's gonna go for when I get it in November. My cruise.
Yes.
I'm gonna thumb my nose at New Hampshire and go down to the Caribbean.
All right.
All right.
I have nothing
Leave
further for the
13.
agenda then. If you have agenda items to add, please be in touch with Marion to get them in there in the next couple of weeks. Hopefully Troy will be available. See you all on the
We need to
13th.
change that date.
I'm flexible, so I'm adaptable.
I'm somewhat flexible.
And every Wednesday, I don't have to go to bingo. It's a good Wednesday.
Good day.
I don't have to make an excuse. I have one.
There you go.
I looked at the average age per town. The only one under 50 is Lancaster, 44, but that's a lot of kids. Everybody's
Yeah,
over
that'll drive the
50.
mean down.
Dalton is quite high in median age.
Let's see if he's
Well,
got-
I'm doing my contribution.
I'm doing my contribution here.
Dalton is 53.3.
Well, actually, thank you.
Well, I'll tell you, I never expected to
Carol's
live,
54.
I never expected to live as long as I did so far, so.
Thank you.
You're not supposed to say that.
Stop it.